We move to today's session, which is part of our Women in Governance series. There's no doubt that we need to engage strategies to ensure that there is greater opportunities for women to join top positions in organizations, including the boardroom. What those strategies may be, however, is important to assess. The use of quotas is one popular method. In some countries, it is mandated by law. In others, it is a principle-based approach that is supported by awards function and all that. But the experiences in different countries has been mixed. So today we are so happy to have persons who would help us focus on this as a strategy and assess whether it can and how it can work for us. Our moderator for today, as I shared earlier, is a director of CCGI. She is from Guyana. This Avia Maria Lindy. And I would like to invite Avia now to take us through this session as our moderator for today. Avia?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Kamla. It's quite a privilege to serve as your moderator today. And as Kamla said, I'm one of the directors with the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute. And I think that this discussion today is so poignant. We are celebrating International Women's Day, and the theme is Inspire Inclusion. So I'd like everyone to use their emoji button. So let's give Kamla a round of applause, or you can send her hearts. Just want to test that we can use on always coming up with the perfect topics at the right time. So let me not delay us getting into this quite a learning experience, and I look forward to learning so much this morning, wherever you are. Thank you for joining. So our panelists comprise of, and we're happy that Sridhar Nagarajan from Mauritius is here. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Perfect. He's going to be our lead panelist today. He holds an MBA in finance and marketing. He has a degree in engineering. He had a successful track record of 28 years as a seasoned professional, which is people-centric and leader, strategic thinker, and a turnaround expert. Sridhar had a distinguished career with the Standard Chartered Bank PLC in India and Africa, spanning various functions as corporate banking, investment banking, strategy, and governance. And he was the CEO of the SCB Mauritius for 7 years, which was primarily focused on Africa. In 2015, he was responsible for a merger, turning around 2 state-owned banks in Mauritius, thus establishing Bank Limited since 2019. He's the regional managing director for IQ and EQ Group, one of the major players in the investor services sector with an international footprint, and he's responsible for the African, India, and Middle East region headquarters in Mauritius. I could say a lot more. He likes golf, chess, and history, but you'll hear more from him when he speaks. I think he's quite equipped to deliver on this topic today. Just use your virtual emoji. Let's give him a virtual welcome as he speaks. Before I call him, I'm just going to read, I think I'm going to let him speak and then I'll introduce the other panelists. I think that makes sense. So we don't forget who we're listening to. So,
if it's okay, Avia, I would prefer if you introduce all the panelists so that once we get started with the discussion,
we'll just flow. Oh, very well. So I'm happy today to introduce our second panelist, and she's from Guyana. From myself, I'm happy I'm not the lone Guyanese here today. Lyndell is someone I admire. She has an illustrious career. If I were to read everything about what she did and what she continues to do, it will take us all the way to 1:30. So I'm just going to share a few highlights. She is, and this is what drives her. Lyndell Danzie-Black serves the business community through her strong voice for the rights of women and entrepreneurs. Her story is a Caribbean story. Strong moral values and a working class upbringing, and family focused on poverty alleviation through education and building strong relationships. And she has not just said that, she has demonstrated this. She's a multi-award winner, and the recent recipient of the 2023 Powerhouse Global Leadership Award, the Caribbean Global Business Influencer Award 2023, the Women Africa 2022 International Recognition Changemaker Award in the United Kingdom, and the 2022 President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana Award, Outstanding Performance in Training, Service, and Mentorship. The Small Business Bureau Networking Master Award 2022, the Women Chamber of Commerce and Industry Entrepreneur Excellence Award 2021, and Small Business Bureau Award Service 2022. She did not stop there. She is the co-founder of the first women chamber, the Women Chamber of Georgetown. She's also the co-founder of the 25 Influential Women Award. So she's a co-creator, and there's magnificent things that Lyndell continues to do. She continues to wow us. I'm not going to say more, but she is qualified and equipped to represent this topic on behalf of Guyana. So please welcome her virtually by sending hearts and claps so that she feels welcome. Our final panelist is no other than a former director of the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute, Joanne Salazar from Trinidad and Tobago, and she's the director and owner of QED Consulting Limited. Joanne is currently the owner of QED Consulting Limited, and prior to starting her company, which is based in Trinidad and Tobago, she acquired a range of expertise in energy and health sectors, locally and in the United Kingdom. Joanne enjoyed a highly successful career in finance and strategic management before transitioning into governance and organizational development. In addition to being a qualified accountant with a master's degree in business administration and strategic planning, she's also a member of the Chartered Governance Institute in the UK, holds certifications in organizational development, change management, and process mapping, and is an accredited director of the Chartered Governance Institute of Canada. We have a distinguished lineup. I'm so humbled to be in the room with all of you, and I would now invite Sridhar to talk to us about such a topical issue, boardroom quotas, and to answer the question, should we be mandating women on boards? Over to you, Sridhar.
Thank you, Avia. I hope you all can hear me well. It's a topic which is close to my heart, and I think just to let you all know, I have been a D&I champion right from the age of 30, first time to chartered in India. And I've continued with that, through my career, which is at the leadership level. It's around 15 years. I've consistently built diverse teams. Of course, it's gender diversity, but of course, I also focus on ethnic diversity and bringing in. And so first, I want to tell you with conviction that building a diverse workforce first, and second, senior leadership team is extremely enriching and rewarding for an organization. And if you're the CEO who has to deliver your KPIs, the type of organization, the robustness which comes with a diverse senior team particularly, is something which I've seen it personally in the last 15 years. So whatever I say, it comes from that direct experience. Now, coming to the question which is raised by our esteemed moderator Avia, in terms of if we can, that's why I gave that background that first we need to see why DEI matters and why particularly gender diversity matters in corporate world. The other aspect is I've heard a saying, just because a cave was dark for 1,000 years, you don't need 1,000 years of light. You have to just light one candle and darkness goes away. So we just need to take a few steps to make up for maybe at least centuries, if not centuries, decades of delay in recognizing the importance of women who play a role in the economy. I think any economist will realize that the right way to calculate a GDP is to ascribe economic value for the women who are actually not in the workforce, which means the economist knows that there is a humongous amount of contribution which happens to the economy from all sections of the society. Now we are now sitting in the modern world. Today, almost all if you say many of the modern politics is how do you really bring your country to a level of growth, means bringing a higher participation of our of the women in an economy is a very important part. Why I'm saying that is a board, of course, is a culmination of a corporate society, and to bring representation there means it also means that we already built the bench strength within a particular economy, so that or a company, so that the pyramid is well represented across the board, so that then we have enough bench strength to bring in women in an economy. Now coming to the quotas per se, again, it's a personal belief with me that if you want to make things right, which has been that way for a variety of reasons, maybe we can get into it as we get into the panel. A decisive bias, a positive bias has to be included. And that is exactly where quotas play a very important role. Now coming to the Mauritius system, I just wanted to take you all that the Mauritius Parliament actually has a quota of 33% women, and it has not been able to meet that for some time. So it is sometimes quotas can be created and with good intentions, and for a variety of reasons, it cannot be met. But however, I forgot to mention to you all that I'm a member of the National Committee of Corporate Governance of Mauritius, and also the chairman of the DEI subcommittee. So from that angle, we have been working with the policymakers at the back end. Also, there is an apex body in Mauritius called Business Mauritius, which pretty much represents all the business organizations, which has been in the forefront of discussing about how because anything we bring needs a consultation with the business. So in this context is what we believe that the Mauritius, with the various amount of measurements we have done, the capacity and capability of women managers and leaders in Mauritius has been quite high for a long period of time. However, that has not been reflected in the boards. So first, we believe that there is very strong capacity. There is women of substance. I can keep, even our chairman of National Committee of Corporate Governance is a woman. There have been multiple positions, particularly in the financial services world, are occupied by women. But you can't say that for a general economy. And in that context where we have worked with the policymakers, we have worked with a bit of consultation with the business community, and we have actually come up with this 25% quota for women in the board of listed companies. So any such thing has to be measured. So it has been rolled out. It's almost 8 to 9 months since the budget was announced. We are almost coming for the next budget. So the measurement time is a year. So to answer the question, it is not still 1 year. But however, there has been quite a lot of discussion, activity, and we know that the Mauritius Institute of Directors has been approached to provide their list of directors. There is a good amount of positive activity in identifying and scoping the women senior talent within Mauritius, and we believe that the quota has been a wake up call. And um, I don't want to predict success, but it's a good starting point to say um, boards have to explain if they couldn't comply. So maybe since it's a discussion, I'll stop there. First, obviously, I can add that it has been welcomed by the business community, the business leaders, um, and NCCG has been receiving quite a lot of kudos, including for the policymakers for doing it. So I'll stop here. Maybe what we'll do is we'll pick up some conversation points from the other members, and we'll take it up from there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sridhar, for sharing context on this topic from a Mauritius standpoint. What I key takeaways that you mentioned is that the Mauritius Parliament has a quota of 33%, but you guys have not been able to achieve that. But you've been working with policymakers and the business Mauritius, and you were able to roll out quotas for women to be including on boards. And it's almost not yet a year, but that has been going pretty well for you. So I don't know if you'd want to share any tips with us as to how you were able to pull this off.
Yeah, that's a good point. See, again, like any small island economy, we are quite well knit as a business community, and the interaction with the policymakers happens both at the informal and the informal level, and it's a much broader theme for us because Mauritius again is a very diverse economy in terms of not just, so when I say it's gender diversity is the beginning, but we are quite ambitious to see how we can take care of the other types of diversity also as we go on. So the first thing is DEI has a long, a medium term to long term agenda. In that we believe gender is one of the things which we should start with. So first of all, we have convinced the stakeholders is if you're committed to DEI, one of the things where we should always start with is the gender, and then move on to ethnic diversity and other types of diversity. So that is
Thank you.
So it's better to also present to them that it's not just gender, but we have to do all types of diversity. The other thing is, as I told you, Mauritius is a country which has achieved almost 95 plus in terms of literacy, and that literacy has been achieved over a long period of time. And women, particularly, if you really track the performance of girls in schools, colleges, and how they perform, normally they are doing much better than boys or men. So the question is, if they're doing so well in the academia, and when many of them also join, they do join in large numbers the workforce. It's a bit of a nice positive challenge. Why are they not represented at the highest policy-making level of boards? So in a way, we have also convinced our stakeholders that the talent pool available in Mauritius is not wanting. So that's the first part. So obviously you can't push something when tomorrow people come and say this quota is actually helping a few people. That's not fair. So first of all, we have convinced ourselves, and there are enough amount of economic parameters to say it is not for want of talent and pipeline. It's maybe for a want of a bit of nudge, and that's where the quota comes from.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ryan. Thank you so much for that, Sridhar. I'd now invite our next panelist, Lyndell Danzie-Black from Guyana, to answer the same question that I posted to Sridhar.
Okay, good morning, and thank you, Kamala and your team. Thank you, Avia, for having me on this panel. It is really a pleasure to be here. On the when Kamala spoke to me about what she was planning, it was an immediate yes, and I was clearing my schedule because I'm so passionate about this particular topic. I really do believe that there should be quotas on boards for women and women participation, because when we talk about DEI, we also want to include access and belonging. And if we are creating that access for women, we are making space for them in the boardroom. You know, McKinsey and Company looked at the correlation between women and financial success. It is stated in so many studies that the participation of women will directly impact our economic development. And my colleague before me spoke about the GDP and participation of women. We also in my research on women boards or women on corporate boards, we also looked at the US and its participation in Fortune 500 companies of 32%, and Norway being the highest in the world of 40% of participation of women. I then moved into the Caribbean and looked to see, you know, what are we doing here? And we saw Jamaica being the country highlighted for a 30% participation in law, and that's important. And you know, just by noting that for the Jamaica model, we realized that the advocacy was strong, and so it impacted what happened in the legislation. But as we all know, legislation is one thing. The regulations associated with the legislation to ensure the operations are done is a different thing. So we are talking about quotas. We are saying that we need to have quotas, and we have the legislation. At least we have a one model in the Caribbean, in that of Jamaica. But what is the true participation? Are women feeling that they are still a part of the board when they are appointed? So first of all, we have to struggle to get appointed. And then when we sit on the boards, how do we feel? Are we bullied? Are our words meaning anything? Should our word be mansplained after we've made our contributions? And where does those contributions feed into actionable policies, strategies, etc.? Recently, the Women's Chamber together with the IDB looked at a study on women, and we were very correct in saying that girls are doing better than boys. Further on, the participation of women in tertiary level education is higher than men. Yet still, in terms of employment, because we as women are always caring for someone else, so then the participation in employment is less than men. And then as we go into management and representation on boards, it becomes less and less. And so if we are saying that we want to develop our economies, particularly in the Caribbean region, we want to ensure that there is a clear participation of women on boards, because that is where change happens. And so often what we find is, even on those boards, when we are spoken to, me personally, I've had those experiences that, you know, folks will come to me and say something like, we would like you to sit on our board, but it's voluntary. And I know the men are not volunteering, right? So when we look at even how we are approached as women to participate on those boards, even though our quotas are there, are we clearly being contracted to be on those boards? Is there a monetary value to us sitting there? Or are we expected to volunteer? And even more so, in answering the question, yes, we should have quotas, we also want to look at what has happened in the past. These are the same boards that create the same decisions that the entire region, both men and women, complain about, right? So if we are bringing in women and we are bringing in their contribution to the development of our regions, we are looking for a different voice, a diverse voice, just as we are looking for voices of people living with disabilities, marginalized youth, and all of those various groups. We want to see women as not having to fight to sit on those boards. I'm very passionate about this and I can go on forever, but I'm going to pause because I know that we are working on time and I'm really here and ready for the conversation. Ladies and gentlemen.
Lyndell, thank you so much for that those passionate expressions. We are aware, and it's testimony from all your awards and the work you've been doing, that this is something that you are passionate about. And I like what you said, the clear participation of women on boards, that is where change happens. And with that, those of you who have your questions, be sure to make notes of it. So we'll come back to your questions, but we'll move on to our final panelists. Joanne, Salazar, the virtual microphone is yours. Let's hear your contribution to this important question.
Good morning, everyone, and happy International Women's Day. The slice I've taken at this is in answering the question, should we mandate women on boards? Let me say, to be provocative, I'm going to disagree with the previous speaker. Not everything she said, of course, but the fact that we should have quotas. And I'm prepared to debate that. I'm going to talk very freely, and then I'll show you one slide at the end to cement it. All the countries that have approached the issue of underrepresentation of women on boards have taken one of two approaches. They've either gone down the quota line or they've used voluntary targets. And a lot of what our first speaker spoke about engaging business and making sure that business saw the need to address this is the way that that is the bedrock of the voluntary approach. But I used a study for today's presentation, which I'm happy to post the link to, that was done by the European Commission, where they looked at the countries in the European Commission who had implemented quotas, and A, how did they go about it, and B, what was their experience. Now, I naturally talk very fast, so just indicate if I need to slow down, but there's a lot to cover in the 12 minutes that Kamala gave me. She really gave me 10, but I stretched it to 12. So let me say, firstly, if you're going down the quota line, if you're thinking of going down the quota line, the experience in Europe is that it has three prongs. One, gender quota laws. That's one. So create legislation that actually says this is your target. Two, some people have gone down the line of, well, okay, we'll look at our corporate governance code. And luckily, all of the countries in Europe have a corporate governance code. And let's put in there recommendations that speak to what how underrepresentation should be addressed on the board, what they're looking to see. And thirdly, some people have gone down the line, some countries have gone down the lines of saying, well, okay, let's just put laws in place that mandate the disclosure of the level of the representation. Let me just canter through this. So Norway is always the country that's mentioned as the country that did it first, but Norway did it in 2003, but Norway is actually not a European country. So the first country in Europe that did it was Spain in 2007. Belgium, France, Italy, Netherlands in 2011. Germany in 2015, Austria and Portugal in 2017. So gradually you have literally 9 European states that have actually legislated for quotas. Them plus another 9 who've gone down the line of saying, we will look at our corporate governance codes and put the requirement for representation or recommendations related to representation in those codes. which of course the companies have to report on. And the rest have actually gone down the line of saying, well, okay, we will make sure that every company has to disclose their level of representation. So I take that to be the approach of let the numbers do the talking, let the numbers do the shaming, let the numbers do the rewarding, let the numbers do the talking. When putting in quotas, if I were to say, listen, I'm going to persuade the Trinidad and Tobago government to put in quotas, one of the things that we'd have to look at is what should the target be? For France and Spain, they decided on a target of 40%. Now, this has been informed by a study that was done by Professor Rosebeth Kanter out of Harvard in 1977, that looked at the experience of being a token in an environment. And of course, women were tokens in the environment where the board environment was considered. I can't go into that study, but it's really interesting. But gender balance is defined as the underrepresented gender achieving at least 40%, between 40% and 60% representation. Gender balance is not 50%, because when you look at, if those of us who are experienced on boards will know that a board position could come up at any time. And then how you fill it should be dictated by where the board is, where the company is in its development, where it wants to go, the skill set that it already has available to it. So you can't, it's not 50-50. Gender balance is between 40 and 60% of either gender. When they did that in Europe, they also looked at, this study also looked at, well, okay, when those targets were set, what influenced the target? Some said 30, some said 40. What was the aim of the legislation? The aim of the legislation in Spain and France was gender balance. That's why they set it at 40. There's another type of board that Rosebeth Kanter called the tilted board. Now, the tilted board is where there are majority men, but there's a significant minority of women. So those countries like Italy, it's not like Italy, like Netherlands and Germany, who set the target at 30%. Obviously, their legislation was targeted at least achieving a significant minority of women on the board, such that their voice would still be heard and they could still register a meaningful contribution in decision making. Funnily enough, Italy started at 33 and then increased their target to 40, which was interesting. Also, the level of the target was also influenced on where they were as a country at the time they brought in the legislation. So for some people like Spain, who were really ambitious, to get to their target of 40% meant that they had to increase their representation on boards by 30, their female representation on boards by 30%, a huge leap. Whereas for other countries like, say, Austria and Netherlands, the shift was quite small because they were already in like the mid-20s. So shifting to 30% was a smaller shift. But the fact that they were even as high as that demonstrated a whole different cultural makeup and approach to business and how the society is structured. The other thing to consider is, who will this target apply to? What will be the scope of the legislation if you introduce legislation that spoke to companies on board? Most of the countries looked at defining the companies that would fall within the scope based on company size, right, or public listing. Now, interestingly enough, in Germany, their legislation only covers 100 companies, which in view of the size of the whole economy means that the legislation really has, it's nice, but it really has very narrow scope. In Spain, the company size has been used, but the number of companies that will be impacted fall into the thousands. So compared to the size of their economy, their quota legislation will have a significant impact. Let me get to now the other things to consider. Will you make it permanent? In my mind, I was surprised when I read this because I assumed most legislation was permanent until it was removed. But in Italy, for instance, they based their legislation on 3 terms of the board, right? So they gave them 3 terms to achieve it in, and if they did it, fine. I mean, not if they did fine. If they did it, it would have to be within that time frame. Most other countries in among the 8 or 9 that I'm talking about actually made it permanent. And the important thing is, after the experience of reviewing it, made those who introduced it, they strengthened it. Most people felt there wasn't a need for the legislation when it was being put in, but after reviewing it, after it had been in for a number of years, they actually strengthened it. But the bit that really fascinated me were the sanctions. Some people have put in laws that there are no sanctions if you don't meet it. So I would ask, what's the difference, right? So Spain has no sanctions with regard to, it's a permanent legislation, it's a 40% target, but there's no sanctions if you don't meet it. Whereas other countries took the approach of saying, well, okay, we're going to give this some teeth. So we're going to they adopted one of two approaches, either an open seat approach, which meant that there were particular seats that had to be occupied by women, or in some cases, let me say in Belgium and in France again, if the company did not meet its target, board fees for the whole board could be suspended. Just think about that, right? And in addition to that, the company would face penalties. So there are things to think about when you're putting in sanctions, when you're putting in legislation for quotas. First of all, the European countries have taken very different approaches. Two, is it going to be permanent? What is the scope? Will there be sanctions? And how would you go about determining what your target is? As you said, I'm an advocate really for the voluntary. I really like the fact that at the end of the day, Mauritius started with the legislative approach, but then really realized that it had to get the hearts and minds of business. It had to get the hearts and minds of the companies who are going to make these decisions on the ground to work with them. So I certainly do applaud that. And to finish my thoughts for today, for the moment, because there's lots I could cover in the discussion, I'd like to show you just one slide. Right, and what you'll see there is this slide is the statistics from European countries plus Australia and Canada and Norway for 2023 statistics on representation. So it indicates the index, the number of companies in that index, whether the country went for a voluntary or quota system, the total number of directorships, and the percentage of women on boards in 2022 and 2023. And I've highlighted, look at the top four, all of them are top five, all of them have exceeded the 40% mark. And that's important because the EU issued a directive in 2022, November 2022, stating that by June 2026, all European companies must have 40%, either 40% executive directors non-executive directors must be women, or 33% of the total directors must be women. That's executive and non-executive, right? That's by June 2026. And here again, I'm making the case that whether you go down the voluntary line or the quota line, they both work, because we have seen that they can work. Because here we have France, that's the top, closely followed by the UK, that's taken a voluntary approach. And one last point before I close right now, I'll say this. When anybody quotes you figures with regard to the number of directors on boards, please ask them executive or non-executive. Most, if not 80% of the advance that's been made in having more female directors, have been more female non-executive directors. The executive pipeline has been very, very difficult to shift. Very, very difficult. And that's a very important distinction, because if you don't have the female managers and seniors coming through that executive pipeline, the actual gender representation on boards is going to be very difficult to sustain. I stop there, and I'm open to thousands of questions. Thank you.
Joanne, thank you so much. As you rightfully said, let the numbers do the talking and let the numbers do the shaming. So we want to thank you very much for that very informative, fact-based presentation, which was backed by data. And I'd leave the floor open to, I don't know, we'll revert to Sridhar, if he wants to respond, followed by Lyndell.
Yeah, no, thank you, Joanne and Linda. Very, very well presented facts. One point which caught my attention is, we want to emulate UK because UK has done quite a lot of work in it. Actually, NCCG or DEI subcommittee wants to actually come up with a report like Alexander Hampton report, which is today into many years it's published. While Joanne is mentioning here that UK it's voluntary, the Alexander Hampton report, which is being published, is quite a pressure. To tell you all what they did is, when they first came, naturally, it was taken voluntary and nothing was done. So they were bold enough to publish a list called One and Done. So One and Done was basically especially the male board appointed one woman, and they basically put a tick mark and left it. So it's not just voluntary, I would say. It was a strong effort to, even though it was not a quota, UK has done quite a lot to achieve that 40%. That's one comment I want to make. And that was a smart way to do it, when they published and sort of shamed all those boards which did One and Done.
Can I respond to that?
Okay. Go right ahead.
Okay. Also, I'm glad you said that, because although it is marketed as voluntary, the Corporate Governance Code has actually picked up some of the requirements. And the Corporate Governance Code in the UK, again, is supposed to be voluntary. However, you cannot maintain your listing on the stock exchange if you do not comply with the code. So it may be voluntary from the point of view there isn't legislation, but if the companies want to maintain their listing on the stock exchange, they have to comply with the code. That's number one. And number two, what I liked about your approach in Mauritius is that in the UK, they also brought in key stakeholders like executive recruitment companies, because a lot of these positions were not going out to advertisement, as you can imagine. And the executive recruitment companies were key players, and it actually prompted coming together of the executive recruitment companies across Europe, and they actually came up with a code of practice that spoke to how they would go about their business to ensure that representative lists were presented. So that's why I liked your approach, because it really tackles the hearts and minds. And once business has got the bit between its teeth, they will run with it with support.
Thank you very much, Joanne. In fact, you highlighted more or less an inclusive approach that Mauritius used in terms of tackling quotas, which kind of balanced off getting to the quotas, but it also had some form of a framework to guide that process. Go ahead, Lyndell.
Okay, thank you so much. One of the things two things we are seeing here. One, that the UK has a model, and that Mauritius has their own model. But I am also a cross-culture trainer. And one of the things that I appreciate when it comes to our region is our culture and context. So within the UK, it can work, and within Europe, it works because the EU has a very strong leaning on the decisions that it makes. Within the Caribbean context and region, it's different. We all know of the CARICOM Secretariat. When CARICOM makes a decision, it operates at the level of the least prepared, basically, because everyone has to come on board. Now, we as women, we have been in this struggle for too long. For us to now look at models of voluntary, and I have no problems with how it happens in Europe, but we must understand culture and context, right? We have been in this, we've been dealing with the issues that women deal with in our Caribbean region for far too long. And that is why I am a product of the European system. I have studied there, I've lived there, I've worked there, but I still believe that within our Caribbean region, the voluntary approach, I would probably be pushing up the daisies before anything happens. You also have an alignment with the stock exchange and going as far as the recruitment agencies. I mean, that is fantastic. But will it work within our context and culture is the question.
And I would say yes, because a lot of what we achieve, we do through networks. So I would say, I think at the end of the day, we end up in this, we do end up in the same place, which is what I was demonstrating, with the chart. But I think because of the short chains of our networks, I do think that we can bring pressure to bear, because what Sir Irving Davis did for the first report that was done in the UK, he actually sat on the phone and rang the people that he knew. And I was surprised. I mean, I researched it when I was in the UK and actually had a chance to speak to him. That's what he did. He literally sat on the phone and called the people that he knew. That's a much shorter chain for us in the Caribbean. So whichever way we approach it, although I'm a passionate advocate for one way, we still end up, if it's done effectively,
we still end up in the same, for sure. But we still must appreciate context and culture in which we operate.
Certainly.
This is quite a spirited discussion, I must say. And if to sum things up, this process is not a prescriptive one, and Lyndell is advocating for culture and context.
Yeah.
So I have 3 persons with their hands raised. I want to thank you for your patience. I'd like to invite Kim to unmute yourself and speak, followed by Lisa and then Rani. Would love to hear from you guys.
Thanks a million, Javier. Joanne, I loved your presentation. I love all the presentations. But would you in particular, Joanne, be willing to share a narrative summary of the data regarding European positions and those of other regions, perhaps, on balanced representation? In fact, let me start by saying I have 3 questions. That's one. Would you be willing to share a narrative? The second is, are we at liberty to use the table that you presented? And if so, how do we cite? And the third,
yes.
And the third is, what is the date of the data captured in the table?
Okay. I should have actually issued this disclaimer at the beginning. The data I've presented, I have mined from other reports. So I can tell you this particular table, and I'm not on commission from the Hampton-Alexander Review, but it's from a report called FTSE Women Leaders. And it's called the FTSE Women Leaders Review, Achieving Gender Balance, February 2024. And when you call that up, you'll find that they've been reporting since 2011. So they were called Women on Boards for the first 5 years. Then they were called the Hampton-Alexander Review for the next 5 years. And now they're just called the FTSE Women Leaders Review. So the table is the data for 2023. That's represented in that report. Although it's dated February 2024, it's 2023 data based on when they collect their data.
Possible for you to put the report, a link
I will.
in the chat?
Happy to.
And the first question was a narrative summary. Is a narrative summary captured in that same report?
Yes, it is, because they focus, what that report focuses on are the different steps. I have to say to you, maybe it's a bit nerdy, but actually pulling up any one of their annual reports and reading what the challenge, how they focus addressing the challenge for that particular year has been very interesting. So they actually start off with showing in 2011, what a lot of the chairman of boards said about women. I mean, it will make your eyes roll and your toes curl, like, well, she's not really, she can't really carry that weight, or she doesn't really want to be in the board, or she doesn't have the capacity to take that on, or where are we going to find these women? These women are too busy doing other things, right? So I kid you not. So they have made actually they've achieved their target was 40%, and they achieved their 40% 3 years ahead of schedule. Right, it was really targeted at 2025, and they've achieved it. The thing I like about their report is that from the beginning, they have not only targeted women on boards, they've targeted, no, not from the beginning, from a few years in, they started targeting the direct reports of the people of directors. So it goes, so they have a target for the number of women on boards, and they have a target for what they call leadership. And when they talk about leadership, they're talking about the women on the director's position and 2 positions below the directors.
Yeah.
So very much that's a wonderful and excellent source of information. The European report I pulled from, sorry, I'm just going to get the name of it. I'll post a link to it as well. So if anybody is thinking, it's called the Women on Boards Policies in Member States and the Effects on Corporate Governance. It is dated December 2021. And it is much more comprehensive than the data I've pulled from. It talks about not only the effect of women on boards, so they very much pull out that having more women on boards actually is a very positive effect on board processes. It's very difficult to say. I know there are some studies, I'm replete with these studies. There are some studies that look at that financial performance is better, return on the assets is better. But they do question some of that in the sense that it's very difficult to disentangle what is actually having they actually say it's not causal. It's not causal, right? Right. And they say that sometimes it's a bit circular, that boards who are more adapt to DEI and its requirements tend to appoint women, but then you see more women on those boards, and you say, well, the women on the boards are the fact that they're more. So it's depending on causal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I have all sorts of other studies, but I mean, most definitely for me, it's about being the case is so strong and being fact driven, because you are going to meet resistance. I mean, we're talking about it happily here, but you are going to receive very deep resistance. And what you need, to me, my approach to this, what you need to be able to say is, here are the facts, here are
These are the facts. Exactly. Thank you so very much.
You could make the decision that you don't want to be a great performer. I mean, that's your decision, right? Yeah. But if you do make the decision that you want to be a performer, and the other thing I didn't mention, if you want to actually retain your younger employees, where this is more and more coming up as a factor in the ESG basket, as to, is this some place I really want to work? I mean, I see what they say on their website, but am I seeing evidence of it when I go to the interview? Am I seeing evidence of it by the news headlines? Yeah. So if you want if you want to swim in that pool, if you want to compete effectively in the pool for the younger employees, you better get on the train.
Yep. Thanks again.
No problem.
Quite a brilliant exchange, Kim. I trust that your questions were answered. Joanne is a reservoir of data. This is my vineyard. This is my vineyard. Yes, and so we'll definitely. So I'd like to invite Lisa to speak. She's been very patient. I think she has a question.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for that. And first of all, thank you, Kamala, for the for arranging this and having me here. And thanks to the speakers for the experience and perspectives, as well as the data presented. It's a very interesting discussion. So I think actually both of my questions were answered, but there might be more to say on this. So my first question was around where the data was from. So you've answered that. Thank you, Joanne. My second question was, it's interesting to see that whether there's a quota or it was voluntary, the top 5 countries ended up in the same place, and then the ones below ended up very close to that as well. One of the reasons you gave for that was around the fact that this was written into the board charters, even if it wasn't legislated, so that would have influenced it. And Lyndell talked about the fact that culture can influence as well. I think this is a really important point. Might work in some places to be voluntary, work in others. But I want to hear more about why you think, or what you've read up on, is the reason why those top 5 countries ended up relatively in the same spot, regardless of this not being legislated or it being legislated. Because I think that's quite fascinating, actually.
I would guess, and this is Joanne's theory of life, that for the voluntary quotas, as Mauritius is finding out, it takes a lot of work. There's a lot of legwork to make the voluntary, because you're actually persuading one mind at a time. Then when you've got a critical mass, they'll move. So when business moves. So and also, so the voluntary does take a lot of work. Now, the legislative takes a lot of work in persuading the respective country to actually take on board this quota. And one of the things that the European report I spoke to actually summarizes is that they go into depth for 5 of the countries, and they actually give you a commentary on what it was like getting the legislation in place, what were the critical arguments in each country, it touches on what was the political climate in each country. I think that no matter which way you approach it, if you're doing it seriously, this is not an idea whose time has come. This is an idea whose time came and went and came and went, and it just won't go away because it goes to the basic rationale. I'll draw a parallel with women's football. Women's football in the UK, when it started in the early 1900s, was far more popular than men's football. They had to turn people away from the games. How did the English FA respond? By banning women's football for 50 years. So they couldn't play on the same field as men for 50 years. And since there were no other fields, it was equivalent to banning them. Now that it's back, you're finding that women's football is filling Wembley Stadium. So it's like, you can't get away from us. We're here. Our contribution is important, and you cannot get away from us, So for me, no matter which way you approach it, legislatively or getting together and persuading one group at a time and moving the needle that way, which is usually slower, I think once that's your ambition and you truly mean to do that, it will come. That's my philosophy. There'll probably be a study on it some point in time, but that's my philosophy. My concern, I have to say, why I remained unconvinced with the legislative role, is that when you legislate, what Norway experienced at the beginning of its process was something called the golden skirts, where there were a small group of women who were occupying numerous directorships because they were the ones that were known in the network. So you can't be effective if you're on more than 3 or 4 boards of 3 or 4 public companies, let me say. So I was concerned that some of the critical root issues that were holding women back, the language in the office, the expectations that, if you're a woman and there's a line that you're the one that in Caribbean terms, you're the one that will be doing the cooking, right? All those kind of unspoken, what they call it, micro something, they call it microaggressions that are not actually being addressed and are holding women back. That was my concern, that the root cause wasn't being addressed. Women's development, women's training, making sure the key stakeholders like the executive recruitment agencies were on board. That was my concern. But I have to say, having looked at the data, both have been successful. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, it does, and some interesting perspectives and parallels as well that you've drawn. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And I'll now invite Rani. She was waiting for a while. Go ahead, Rani.
That's okay. It's very interesting. Well, let me say that everyone gave, a really unique perspective, their own perspective. So I'd like to sort of just touch on different points. Joanne, I love your stats. But one thing that I didn't get or glean, and I was distracted for a point for a phone call. I don't know if that came up. In terms of the table, it would have been great for me to see how the performance of the companies matched up in terms of the percentage and the performance. Now, I know it's obvious, it's stated, McKinsey did tests, a research that shows naturally, of course, but it would be good to see the different countries, because as you said, the scope of legislation was different. So that would also affect the results in terms of you would have the effect of the company individually and collectively as it contributed towards the economy.
I think-
Lyndell, yes?
Go ahead,
Sorry.
go ahead. No, I was going to say that McKinsey does an annual report called Diversity Matters, right? And that annual report picks up the difference that diversity, and moving on from just women, but diversity makes to the performance of the company and the performance of teams. This report is actually targeting the target, right? And building on the work that's been done by others in other spheres. But in terms of performance, there's a figure that the report that jumps into my mind, because up until a couple of years ago, they were doing it annually. I need to check, but it's called Diversity Matters. And it is really interesting in terms of, because they get into things like what you would call the broken ladder. Mauritius was quoting some figures about the percentage of women in the UK and the US, and the UK, US and Caribbean. The proportion of women, the proportion of new entrants to the workplace is greater for women than men. The proportion of women there a couple of years before they get into supervisory level is greater for women than men. The ILO supports this as well. Somehow, when you're looking up the organization, as you go further and further up, they disappear. And it's called the broken ladder. Somewhere the ladder's broken. But anyway, I'm sort of digressing into other things. Sorry, I knew you had your questions.
But
I'm trying hard to limit myself to the question.
I know, I can imagine. We'll have to continue this offline, Joanne.
Yes, yes, definitely.
So I do remember somewhere seeing a metric of, the more women on the board increases by about 10%. But that I don't know how that applies, or if it's an average.
Right.
Lyndell brought up the point about the culture. And what first of all, let's say in Trinidad, the CCGI, when it first started, developed a corporate governance code. And there was a certain goal and ambitions around this corporate governance code. I don't think it has gotten anywhere at the moment. And so we really haven't tested the strength of a corporate governance code that has been collectively adopted and pushed throughout the Caribbean.
Right.
And I would, sorry, Lynn.
So can I come in on this?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
Okay, so that is the issue, and for me, I'm appreciative of the stats that came out today, especially as it relates to Europe. But we are a Caribbean corporate governance organization, which means that the issues as it relates to all of what we discussed today has to be seen in the context of our region. And why I love the stats that Joanne has proffered and brought to us is because we need case studies and we need precedents so that we can now start developing, what is, like you said, our code. But the point is we have to pull out, because for us to action and not talk and come back on a webinar again. We have to action. There's an absence of the data. I know you're laughing, Randy, because that is our region, right?
I know. Listen,
I've collected it.
I was on the board of CCGI.
Caribbean related data.
I've collected it.
You have collected. So where is it, Joanne?
Right,
because
I'm about to publish. No, hold on.
Thank you.
I agree with you 100%. And the reason for looking at what other countries have done, I appreciate the cultural.
Yes.
The issue is taking out from that the lessons that we learned. And one of the lessons that they learned was through the stock exchange to make the corporate governance code enforceable. Our stock exchange in Trinidad and Tobago has not got on board with regard to saying to listed companies, we expect you as part of your listing requirements to comply with this code.
So Joanne, just 1 minute. If you just bear with me. So now, there's a bit of the crux. So you have Trinidad Stock Exchange. I want you to compare it with Guyana, Jamaica, and any other Caribbean island who has a stock exchange as it relates to readiness. So when we spoke of the stock exchange in Europe,
You and
They
I would
are
have
ready.
no.
They are
You and I would have
there.
to talk. You and I would have to talk offline because they weren't ready in 2011. They had 9% of women on boards. They weren't ready.
No.
How that came
Sorry.
about?
No,
So,
not
so maybe
9%.
I should say. So let me just qualify what I said. I'm not talking about. I'm not talking about the women
Women.
representation per se. I'm talking about the stock exchange itself, right?
Well, I'm not
So when you look at,
I'm not
so
qualified to speak on
I am because I live in Guyana, and Avia will bear me out on this. Can you compare the Guyana Stock Exchange to that of Jamaica, Trinidad?
No.
Or I am not even venturing into Europe. And I'm sure those ladies here will bear me out on this, you
Sure.
know? Yeah.
I have one more thing to bring up. That
Yes,
is,
sorry, Radhi.
which is
I love
common
it.
in the Caribbean, and that is the level of government and
Support.
state corporations.
Mhm.
So when we talk about other countries and we talk about the private sector, the government plays its rightful role of facilitation and development, but it is not as intrusive and not as large, doesn't play that large role in terms of, so when you look at how many things that they control, how many boards they have, I think an important difference is being able to convince the governments of the Caribbean about the adoption of corporate governance. And if I may be so bold to say, that is where we got stuck in Trinidad with the corporate governance code.
But Jamaica leads because at least they've outsourced their appointment of directors.
Of directors, indeed.
Yeah, Jamaica leads. They've gone far, far ahead. I can't imagine that in Trinidad.
So I can almost think of the conversation or the meeting that's going to precede this coming to come.
Yeah.
We have to call it out and call it what it is. We are going to be having the meeting of the meeting of the meeting, then the decision of the decision, then the decision. You know, and that is where the issue is. Then you have a Jamaica as a case study that we can use, but will we all want to jump on board and do it? Right?
But if we're talking about legislation, about the quota for women, before that, we have to talk about adoption of strong corporate governance principles and the belief that is going to work in the first place.
Precisely.
Women.
So Rani, that is why I love what the NGOs like the Caribbean corporate governance is doing, where you even try to have the code.
Yeah.
You know, and that is advocacy within its own, you know?
Yep.
This has been quite a passionate discourse. You guys didn't even need me to, but everything just flowed pretty nice. I'd like to invite Sridhar to speak.
I think we just lost him. Yeah.
I think we just lost him.
Yeah.
He was waiting so long that we lost him. I noticed.
That's women on board. Oh my gosh.
In any event, we have another director here from Jamaica who can speak about the. I'd love to hear from Camille if she's still here.
Oh gosh, yes.
It's Camille Cumberbatch Dory that you are seeing, not our Camille Fifi.
Okay. Is anyone here from Jamaica?
Oh, have we lost Camille? Okay.
No, Camille didn't join us today.
Oh, she didn't join us today.
Okay.
So Sridhar is re-entering the room.
Yes.
Yeah, but this is a really exciting conversation.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
I love it.
I really enjoying it.
I really do.
Sridhar, we're welcoming you back into the room. I know the ladies were very passionate in their expressions of, and rightfully so. So we'd like to hear from you in response to all that you've just heard.
Indeed, thanks, Avia. No, I'm sort of outnumbered, so I'm keeping quiet. but on this topic, I'm as passionate, and I'm fully able to appreciate appreciate the sentiment. So I'm thoroughly enjoying it. No, I suddenly couldn't hear it, so that's why I went and came up.
Okay, so if I may, I have a question to ask Sridhar, which we need to also discuss, because one of the responses you hear from today's young women is that they are not so much in favor of quotas, because then they feel as though I'm just here as a token. Today's young women, as opposed to my generation, for instance, where we were not even being given opportunities and had to work our way, to be seen and to be heard. Today's young women, however, have entered the professional workspace very early in their careers, and now there is a measure of discussion happening with respect to meritocracy and whether quotas should be considered. So I wanted to ask Sridhar, what has been the experience in Mauritius in terms of having that issue addressed by law? What was the reaction of women? Did they all welcome it, or did you have any of the younger professional women saying, well, we didn't need quotas because we'll find our way, in the parliament and in the boardrooms? And I would similarly love to hear from Lyndell and Joanne their thoughts on whether the environment has changed, from 10 years ago. And, do we still need to talk about quotas, or is there a different strategy we need to address because we now have our young professional females in the workplace?
Sure, Kamala. That's a good question, and it's also a good focus on the younger generation, because it's very clear that they think differently, and also they sit on the laurels of what all you have done for the last 2 generations. So to be fair, yes, the younger generation are a generation which think differently, and they are okay. Here, the best way to address it is we have to segregate that generation from the financial service sector, which I am part of, to the general manufacturing sector in Mauritius. So if you really see, the financial services sector actually now is having close to 65% women, and they are much more preferred. They're doing wonderful jobs. So if you really see, naturally they have the luxury now to not worry about quotas. But having said that, you can't say that about the larger population of business Mauritius, which is about, when it takes into account the largest segment. I am also not, it's not that we have done a survey, so it is only a feel that given that financial services is well represented, they are also now represented in middle management. For example, if you take my company, the country management team is 60% women. The board itself is 50% women. So that means there is capacity which has come, so they'll obviously be less worried about it. But I don't think we can take the eye off the ball when it comes to the larger economy. And I think they are supportive. So that's what I would say.
Okay, so Lyndell, what are you hearing from the young professionals, especially the ones who have joined the Guyana Women's Chamber, for instance? Do they feel they need
Yes.
to step up, or
So what I feel is that, first of all, is that I think we need to create a pathway. And in creating that pathway, we know, in the back of my head is that, no, I shouldn't even say in the back of my head, because they walk up to me and say, Miss Black, I am so happy when you speak on our behalf, because I don't know that I could say it in the way that you say it. So that alone tells me that I have a responsibility to create that pathway. But my 20, almost 23-year-old daughter will say to me, Mom, why aren't they selecting me on my skill set, on my qualification, and my ability to contribute to this board? I can almost hear her saying that to me, and I'm sure Avia, who has kids around that same age, will probably concur. And so I am sure they will question it. And what my responsibility right now is to help them to build that confidence to speak up, because they are thinking it. That why aren't you? It's something that I used to be thinking about too. Why do I have to constantly be fighting to be here? Why do I always have to be justifying why I'm a good candidate for this? And I think they are thinking that even now and at younger ages. So that's what I see that our responsibility kind of is. Create that pathway and help them to build their confidence, so they are going to question, and hopefully, like Joanne alluded to, over time we will see that voluntary happening. You know?
Agreed.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that feedback, Lyndell, because I myself have a young daughter who is just turned 22, and that's the language she speaks as well. So they don't want to feel that it's only because I'm female that you're giving me this opportunity. I am bright, I'm competent, I'm more than capable, I've demonstrated my ability to get results, and therefore this is the basis on which I am to be moving forward. And I'm happy that it means the conversation will evolve, and we will
Yes.
not still be at the same place that we would have been 10 years ago.
I think that was a brilliant question, Kamala, regarding reference to our young women entering or joining boards, and I totally agree. In fact, I have two daughters and two sons actually, and I think there's a generation difference in the generation, how we were raised to be kind of like more subservient and tolerant. And this generation is not one in which that they're going to accept certain things. In fact, I consider myself more of a millennial because I hang out with them for the most part of my life. And, I think their approach is going to move things in a positive direction, but we can't discredit the work that was already done and that is currently being done to create that pathway for them. And we are obligated to ensure that they have a better starting point than we had. And this should not happen in the next 5 or 10 or 20 years. It should happen now. That's my contention. And the beautiful thing is that we're having this conversation, that Kamala is so bold and bodacious to bring this question to a forum like this, and for us and Joanne to go and to do the research, and also for us to have the Mauritius example. And even I'm very happy that we also have Jamaica as a model or a best practice that we can build on. But so that's why, we advocate, the CCGI is advocating for more support, more voices, so that the message of corporate governance can go far and wide, and because it has far-reaching benefits to countries and globally, especially the Caribbean. So I look forward to you guys supporting us, and especially in our efforts to come to Guyana in November. I'm just pitching right now that we hope that the Women's Chamber will come on board, Lyndell.
Yes.
Well, I will definitely bring it to the president. Now that I am no longer on the board of the Women's Chamber, we believe in making pathways again for other women to lead. But I will definitely bring it to her and encourage them to be a part. Just let us know, for my sake especially. Give me dates long in advance. You know how that works. Yeah. So I can, make sure that I am a part, because I remember when you all were there last time, I was not in country. So I want to be able to support you there.
Yes, excellent. No, we should have those dates ready before the end of March. So
Yes,
once we have
excellent.
we'll begin to share that information.
I'd
Yes?
also like to say, in
Yes.
terms of the view of the younger women who are finding that they're butting up. I don't know what the ceiling is called now, whether it's still glass or whatever.
Yes.
It's important to drive home to them that we can't make this their problem, because that's what has been done to women in the past. That it's what's wrong with you while you haven't been appointed. These are deep-rooted systemic issues, so it needs to be tackled at several levels. Legislatively, if that's the way you want to go, or as a community groups coming together, parliaments doing what they need to do, as well as making sure that the women, as with any other, whether you have sons or daughters, are developed and have the skill set required by the workplace. But we certainly can't leave them at all with the impression, these young women, that it's to do with them.
No,
because that's
totally.
what the system, that's how the system continues
System,
to thrive.
yes.
Yeah.
So that narrative definitely needs to change.
Yeah, that definitely needs to change, you know, and as I
I
say,
like,
sorry.
sorry, yeah, Joanne, I like what Avia pointed to specifically, which is that we need to build their confidence because
Yeah.
everything else is going to be there. So that, as
Yeah.
you point out, Joanne, at that point, this is what is going to make the difference. I do
Yeah.
want to add, though, as Avia has pointed to the Jamaica experience, we also know that in as much as we are trying to fill this gap that exists at the top level, there has been a challenge with our young men at the lower levels.
Mm-hmm.
And ensuring that as we move the pendulum, it doesn't swing so far that by the time we realize we do have people, in fact, looking and asking, where are the men? Where are the young men? So what Jamaica has done is part of their legislation is the 30% diversity is with respect to gender on either side. So
Mm-hmm.
we will not eventually reach that point where it's only women on boards, which can happen.
No. That's why gender
No,
balance. That's why I was very careful to say that gender
yes,
balance
Yeah,
is 40 to 60%. It is
yeah.
certainly there are, believe it or not, some all women boards, huh? I
Yes.
know they're not many, and they too
Mm-hmm.
have the challenge of achieving gender balance. And I think
Yes,
that's an
yes,
important message because sometimes the rhetoric, the early rhetoric men interpreted the early rhetoric when talking about
yes,
women on boards as anti-man, right? Which is not, that's nothing to do with it. It is
yeah.
about, that's why gender balance is 40 to 60%.
So,
Not all women boards, no.
yeah. So that is why was it last year or year before, we had Lance Hines as the sole man on the women's chamber. And folks were like, but I thought you all were women's chamber. I said, yes, because we believe in men and women in partnership for development. And he is a member of the chamber, so he can get on the board. And I don't see a problem with that because we didn't say it was going to be all women boards. So there I think now we are all women boards, but we have to be able to still make space. And I like the question that you ask. And when I did the research on Jamaica, I noticed that they also included the male. And we are coming to a time, or it has been happening, where people are looking at the marginalization of the young male, right? We are mothers of sons, and we
Mm-hmm.
don't want that for our sons. So, we also have to keep that in mind as we look at the younger generation coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that question very much.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. All right. Now, Joanne, the research that you have been doing, I know that this is something that you've been passionate about for a number of years. So,
Yeah.
first, let me volunteer on CCGI's part that we would be quite happy to partner with you when you want to launch your research so that we
Okay.
can ensure that your voice is across the Caribbean as well. Because I know that your
Okay.
Yes.
was not just specific here to
Right.
Trinidad and Tobago, but that you did a
Yeah.
comparison with
What
the
what
other
we
countries.
what we did is it's the data collection again, following the theory that let the numbers do the talking. So we looked at the
Yes.
Barbados, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and the Eastern Caribbean Stock Exchange, and we collected from the annual reports. And the reason why we did it from the annual reports is that everybody has to publish their annual report.
Yeah.
So we went and we looked at those annual reports from I think it's 2018, 19. I think by now we have 5 years, and just looked at the number of women on boards and to see how has that percentage changed. So we're really following a philosophy of let the numbers do the talking. And we're about to, hopefully
Right.
by the end of March, we're about to publish that. The next step I would really love to do, because that's only listed companies, the real economic engine in Trinidad in particular, the private companies who don't have to publish the report. So we would hope to generate enough interest and in the topic as well as the data that private companies would come on board, and then we would have a real measure. When you then add in state entities, you will then have a real measure of what's really taking place across the economy as opposed to just listed companies. But most certainly, talking to when I heard Lyndell mention the lack of data, that's what got me into this. All those studies that I know, the Deloitte study, the McKinsey study, the World Economic Forum, which, by the way, says we're not going to achieve, the latest report says we're not going to achieve
Parity.
gender equality
Gender
until
parity in a while, yeah.
gender parity for 131 years. But never mind that. I'm not going to get depressed about that. And but there were no, even if they said that it was worldwide, when you looked at where the Caribbean was stuck in, it was kind of tucked into Latin America, and it was patchy in terms of which countries responded and which countries didn't. So the lack of Caribbean data has been what drove me to do this. I do presentations and I always get asked, well, so what's the figure for Trinidad? And okay, so what's the figure in the Caribbean? And I got kind of tired putting my tail between my legs and saying, but listen, Europe is doing this and Europe is doing that. Yeah, so we gathered the Caribbean data for the published companies only, and hope to expand that as interest grows.
But that's brilliant, Joanne.
Yeah, can I just say, Madam Chair?
Go ahead.
For my half a century on this in this world, that too often, we are sitting on lessons learned, Joanne, and I'm not at all knocking the statistics. I am an avid follower of the World Economic Forum. I those who know me know that I am research based. However, we are for too long going on lessons learned, and I'm so pleased that you have ventured to do this. And when you do publish, please let me know. Send me a link. I'll even buy it. Yeah, it's true. We need it.
Yeah. And I think that will inform the conversation. I mean, yes. And what I like is when the detractors come on board and say, but, and we say, yes, okay, no problem, because they're in the conversation. At least they're in the conversation.
Yes, indeed.
All righty. So there's a question in the chat from Mr. Tion Allen, and he'd like to, from a Caribbean perspective, what is the CCGI community doing to nurture and create male allies?
Okay, I need to understand the question correctly. So what is CCGI doing to create male allies?
To
nurture.
Okay.
Nurture and create male allies.
Okay, a very interesting question. I should say that I immediately cannot respond and say that there is such an obvious strategy. I don't think that this has been our intent. What I can say is that CCGI has been building a community of persons who are talking to each other constantly, who are putting on the table what are the key issues that is impacting our ability to have a better run society, to have societies where the quality of living for everyone is better than where it is at now. And therefore we don't keep ourselves focused only on things that happens in the boardroom, but rather what happens in the boardroom, how it impacts everyone else. And therefore, our intention is that this community of persons should be willing to work together, that our numbers together is what gives us the strength to make the kinds of changes that need to be made. Because a lot of the changes that we are required to make is deep-rooted cultural issues.
Yes, context and culture.
But Kamala, you and I have had conversations where, as we developed it, one of the thoughts that we had back in the day, it wasn't recent, but back in the day, was about when you looked at some of the lessons learned, like for instance in Australia, there's a group of CEOs in Australia who are focused on gender parity. And we looked at that, but of course the beginning of that is getting the data out there. So that's where, so I don't know if you remember those conversations that we used to have. Yeah, so it's not that it hasn't been thought of, it's just that the issue first was to get the data out there, create the interest, and then use that as an attraction for because I mean, I can name 4 or 5 CEOs or stroke chairmen who would be saying, well, why didn't you call me? You know, I'm here, come, you know.
So there's a follow-up comment. So there's a follow-up comment from Tion Allen. He said, "Want male allies be required for better representation?"
They are required to move.
Can I respond?
Sure.
Yes.
Can I respond? Okay, so I believe that we in people like Sridhar, who's here with us, there are quite a number of male allies. I know Theon well, so I know he too is one. And I believe that there is a concept around this where we create those sponsors for the journey that we are on, Theon. It's just that I don't know that anyone has couched it or
Yeah.
taken a strategy towards that. And I've heard you before, and I'm hearing you now because I believe that that needs to be also a strategy where we who push and promote women, the agenda of women and the narrative of women, we have to embrace those men or even reach out to to the men who can push our narrative in a positive light. So, you know, that's probably not, I haven't heard that it is happening. I'm not saying it's not happening, but Shida has hands up, so maybe he can give us his view
Go
in
ahead.
Mauritius. Yes.
No,
Go
thanks.
right ahead.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Linda. No, that's a very good pointer. I believe the question points to something which we do particularly in small island states much effectively. We have to recognize, and surely even if you look at the UK economy, and as Lyndell said, we should actually note that point and make it into a strategy. Because if you want to make change in a society, not just through quotas, and even if through quotas, certain individuals, particularly in gender, because we are talking about making a change, can play a very big role, and I've seen that in Mauritius. Actually, the National Committee of Corporate Governance was set up by the initiative of the government, but initially taken forward by Tim Taylor, who played a big role in setting up, even nurturing Aruna, who's the talent today, who has who's the chair of NCCG. So I like that concept. We never saw it that way, but the questioner has put it in a nice ways that we should even proactively develop it as a strategy. That's what I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Sridhar. And Tion, thank you so much for bringing that question to the limelight. It just gives us something else to address, which will help in the grander scheme of things. I think this discussion has been very, I think, Kamala, I don't think we have enough time to have gone through all the things we would have wanted to discuss. So maybe we may have to have a part two, but if we're having a part two, we should come back with some tangible evidence of something that we would have accomplished coming out of this session here today that we can report on and have other persons come on board so that we can actually, by the time, hopefully, Joanne's report is out.
Joanne's report, exactly. That's what I was thinking.
So we use that as a basis, to move, because there's a lot of stuff that
we can become accountability buddies for Joanne. So Joanne will get it done.
So Joanne, this is going to be quite an event. You have to look at it from that perspective. I think the discourse, this discourse today has been so enlightening. I think everyone was so pumped up and inspired and passionate. So I know, Kamala, there are a few action points that you have taken away from every time we have a workshop. There are action points which spirals into something else that's going to come out of it. So we want to ensure that we track the next steps. We look forward to Joanne's report as something that's going to use as a pivot, so that we can, and especially the small states. Guyana, I know we're the fastest growing economy in the world, but along with that, we also need governance and all the other tenants to go along with it, so that it's sustained for generations to come. So so those are
takeaways, Avia. I just wanted to share quickly that in as much as we are having the conversation, to me, one of the absolute key takeaways was what Joanne said in terms of the strategy for how do you ensure that this is effective and sustainable long term. And the fact that we may not necessarily want to make it law, but there's a different way in which it can become a
Yes.
mandatory requirement. And I really appreciate the explanation and approach that it be part of the corporate governance code, that the code be adopted and implemented by the respective stock exchanges so that there are consequences, because it's just not good enough to just talk about it. But some of those things do take time. But it means that we need to understand that that is
Start
the
the conversation.
and what is the outcome that we expected. So it doesn't go off the radar.
Yeah. That's a brilliant summing up. Also, we also have to be mindful of including culture and context.
Yes,
Yes,
and I want
always,
to say,
always.
The young man who brought up the idea of having the male support.
Sion.
I forgot the word that he used, but you know, maybe
Allies.
ally, right?
Allies.
We take for granted a certain kind of approach in life. Because for me, one of my favorite radio stations growing up has been Radio for Women and the Men Who Love Them. I just had loved that tagline because that is what it is. We really don't exist in siloed worlds in this way.
No.
As women, even as we seek to make change with certain things, the men in our lives are impacted. They do respond. And generally, we look at it that they are in fact part of our lives. I've always found, you know, it's for women and the men who love them.
Yeah.
So
that's a great
but it's
very, very
helpful
nice,
that he has
Kamla.
pointed out that we are not to take that for granted, but
Granted,
rather
yes.
we should in fact have a strategy to ensure that they're male allies. So what I can share from CCGI's perspective is that our focus is corporate governance on the whole. We have addressed the issue of women on boards directly. We have our conference on women women in governance. It's a conference that we have collaborated with 6 other governance institutes that are led by women, one of which is Mauritius, which is why Sridhar is here with us today, because it's a continuation of that conversation. So our space is to raise those issues and ensure the conversation is good. We'd be very happy to collaborate with those organizations where this is your specific objective. So for instance, if it is the Trinidad and Tobago chapter of the International Women Forum, or the Barbados chapter, or the Jamaica chapter, or the Guyana Women's Chamber, in whichever way that being your specific objective, we'd be happy to partner and collaborate so that we can pool our resources and together help help this happen further. So we are just about 15 minutes away from our end of session, Avia. So maybe what you would want to do is invite each of the speakers to basically
give their closing remarks. Absolutely. So, on behalf of the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute, I'd like to thank you all so very much. Very engaging, very spirited discussion, and I'd like for you to share your final remarks.
I want to say that there are 2 ways to approach in the basket, the countries that have really paid attention to addressing underrepresentation of women have gone along 2 ways. But my bottom line message is that when you look at the 2023 statistics, the 2 ways, which is voluntary or legislative quotas. But when you look at the 2023 statistics, though they've both been toiling in the vineyard for a long time, they still have achieved around the same percentages, the lower 40s, mid to lower 40s of representation of women on boards. And I think it is a matter of, to borrow another panelist, to borrow Lyndell's commentary, the road that you choose will obviously be influenced about the conditions at your starting point. Yeah. And of course, culture comes into that as well. So I would say that whichever way you go, the most important thing for me is that you give it serious thought, you structure your approach, you set a target, and you get going. Thank you.
I was saying, this is a wonderful debate. In a way, debates and discussions like this is what has helped us reach where we are. We should take note that these small steps which we take in whatever smaller groups which we do have played a very significant role in what we have achieved. And when we look back, we have achieved a lot in terms of gender diversity. And in that way, I've thoroughly enjoyed the debate, and not just the debate, as Joanne just summarized. It's not about. It's also about going with the right type of measurements, and that is why, if you all really see in Mauritius, we have started a DEI charter, where we get the corporates to sign the charter and agree to targets which we will not publish, but we'll aggregate and publish. And we are really enthused to see that now close to around 20 large corporates have signed the charter voluntarily. Now they have told us the clear parameters they will do. So there's a lot of things which is happening at the back end to slowly take this particular agenda of diversity in particular, but gender diversity as a top priority to a higher level. And I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's 11:30 to 1:30 in Singapore, but you all have kept me really excited and awake with the discussion, I should say. Thank you. I really enjoyed being part of it.
Sridhar, thank you for the personal sacrifice you've made, being in another time zone. So we thank you so much, and being quite alert and engaging as you were. So I'll invite Lyndell to come in with her closing remarks.
Yes. Okay. So, investment in women is too much of an important and invaluable subject for us to be approaching it in a cocoon. We can't. We simply can't. We can't afford to approach this as in silo. And, although, we spoke about so many lessons learned, but we have to listen and we have to hear what is happening in Mauritius, what is happening in the UK, in the EU, so that, or in the Baltic, so that we, in making the decision, can make the right decision. So I really appreciate this August body and being part of your panel, because that has created a further ceiling for me of what I have been considering. When Camilla spoke to me, I was saying to her that I'm writing on women on boards, and there this happens. So it's very important, and a very important conversation for me personally, and certainly for the members of the Women's Chamber, because I had them register, so quite a number of them are here. I am sure that this was a great conversation, and I really thank you, Camilla, for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Lyndell. You could not have said it better. And all of you, this perspective you brought to this course added tremendous value, and even has given us more work to do. So we thank you very much for your time. Sridhar, in your time zone, we know it's you're like, wow, it's 12. There's a 12 hours difference, if I'm correct. So thank you so much for staying up with us, and those who've joined the conversation. I also want to thank you, and I pass the microphone back to Master Control. Pamela, over to you. It was a pleasure.
I can't resist, because my naughty side can't resist saying, Sridhar, when you explained to your wife that you were in a session with 4 other women, I hope she understands.
Good point, Joanna. But I have built top teams full of women, so she knows that it's all good intention.
I love it.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. I want to start by acknowledging my peers across the Global Institutes, because we have had, apart from Sridhar being present here on behalf of the Mauritius Institute of Directors, Lisa, who joined us earlier in the discussion, is from the Gulf Institute, GCC-BDI, and Jane Valls, who was executive director at the time there. She was one of those persons who worked with me, who inspired, in fact, and made the connection across the other governance institutes for us to really begin to talk across the globe, so that we could provide learnings to each other and support. So I want to start there in saying thank you to all of them. Lisa, I'm so happy to have you here. And we continue to look for collaborations with your team out in the Gulf as well. And to our panelists, I want to say, Sridhar, you did speak at our last Women in Governance conference, and I was inspired. So that is why I immediately contacted Sheila and said, Sheila, I need to find this guy because I want him to talk to us about what this experience has been in Mauritius so that it can also help us in our discussions and discourse with respect to how we move forward here. Lyndell, I'm so happy to have met you. I would be honest and tell you that I was looking for the Guyana Women's Chamber. So I asked Javier, okay, who should I talk to? And I did have a short, brief conversation with your president, and that's how I got your contact information. And so, but I was so happy that it was fortuitous that this is really your passion. And
It
therefore,
really is.
a perfect fit for this panel.
Thank you.
And
Thank you so
Joanne, I
much.
can tell you, you're most welcome. From the time I thought about women and quotas, I knew I didn't have a choice. That it had to be you that I would ask, because I was aware of the research that you have been doing and the studies that you would bring forward, and therefore the empirical nature of the discussion which would follow and which would inform all of us. And so I'm so grateful to all of you for taking that time to come and share and help us in ensuring that this discourse is not just a token shop, but it's really helping us to further understand and make the choices that's going to help us continue to walk that road. So 10 years from now, the discussion is entirely different. And the discussion is informed by research about what has been happening in our region, and not just citing the McKinsey's and
exactly. I'm so glad to have met Lyndell. I'm sure she may not be glad after this because I'm going to pester her.
Oh, please do. Please do, because you are right up my alley. I really believe in statistics. Those who know me will tell you.
Yeah.
You know, I really
I'm
do.
so glad. So I'm glad to thank you for the moderator. Thank you so much. You were well controlled. You let us kind of rabble on and then come back. So thank you. And I'm so happy to hear what's going on in Mauritius. And I know I'm going to follow it. Publish, please.
Yes.
Definitely going to follow it because in
We're
Malaya,
looking forward to it.
Yeah, they did a study in Malaya that demonstrated that when they introduced quotas, they actually increased the quality of the women that they had on the boards. Because, there's always a concern that what you're doing is just a box ticking exercise.
Yes.
That it not undeserving is sometimes the word that's used, but in Malaysia, they did a study that showed that the quality of women on board that were appointed after the quota did not diminish and in fact increase. So
Awesome.
Good luck to you.
If I may just read a closing comment from Ashwini Saran, she said it's an excellent topic, execution of topic, love the energy and passion to effect change. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you also. Very special to our
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everybody. It was a pleasure. Have a good day, everyone.
It was a pleasure. Really, really great. Bye.
Bye.